The Navy officer came home to find his wife in a coma, his life savings stolen by the one man he should have been able to trust. The hiss of the taxi's air brakes was the sound of a world ending and another beginning. Lieutenant Commander Elias Thorne felt it in the soles of his boots, a vibration that traveled up his spine and settled in the tight knot between his shoulder blades. For 18 months, the dominant sounds had been the rhythmic thrum of a ship's engine and the sharp, metallic clang of work on deck. Here, the air was thick with the smell of rain on hot asphalt and the sweet decay of autumn leaves, the scent of home. He swung his sea bag over his shoulder. The weight was familiar, a ghost limb he'd carried across oceans and continents. It was lighter than the combat pack he'd humped through desert landscapes, but somehow, today, it felt heavier. It was weighted with expectation, with the polished, perfect image of homecoming he had rehearsed in his mind 1,000 times. He'd chosen not to call from the naval base. He wanted to see her face when he walked through the door. The surprise. The sudden, brilliant explosion of joy he'd pictured during long, lonely nights on watch. The taxi pulled away, leaving him in the quiet embrace of his own street. Nothing had changed. Mr. Henderson's prize-winning roses still climbed the white picket fence next door. The oak tree on the corner, the one with the crooked limb that looked like a flexed arm, stood just as it always had. These were the anchors of his memory, the landmarks he used to navigate his way back to a life he'd put on pause. His house was at the end of the cul-de-sac, a modest blue colonial with white shutters. Their sanctuary. He walked toward it, his steps quickening, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. But the rhythm stuttered. The closer he got, the more the perfect image in his mind began to fray at the edges. The first sign was the garden. Sarah's garden. It had been her masterpiece, a riot of color and life that was the envy of the neighborhood. Now, it was a ruin. Brown stalks sagged under the weight of dead blooms, and thick, aggressive weeds choked the flower beds. It was a patch of forgotten earth. A stack of slick, rain-warped newspapers lay bundled on the porch, their headlines faded into meaningless blurs. A fine layer of grime coated the windows, obscuring the view inside. A cold, alien feeling began to creep into his veins, the same instinct that warned of a threat long before it was visible. This was not his home. This was a place where life had stopped. He put his key in the lock. It resisted, grating as he forced it to turn. The door swung inward on a gust of stale, cold air. The house was silent. Not the peaceful quiet of an empty home, but a deep, hollow stillness that felt cavernous. It smelled of dust and disuse. His military training, a part of him as essential as breathing, took over. Scan and assess. Eye sweeping the living room, he catalogued the details. A film of dust on the coffee table. A single glass with the faint, ghostly imprint of a lipstick stain on its rim, Sarah's shade. But it was old, the dust settled over it. The mail was piled on the kitchen counter, a chaotic heap of junk circulars and windowed envelopes. Sarah. His voice was a rough, foreign sound in the suffocating silence. It was swallowed by the emptiness, receiving no echo, no answer. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of his composure. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over her contact photo, a picture of her smiling, taken on the beach just before his deployment. He pressed the call button. It went straight to voicemail. Her voice, bright and cheerful, filled his ear. "Hi, you've reached Sarah. I can't get to the phone right now, but leave a message and I'll call you back." He tried again. Straight to voicemail. His gaze fell back to the pile of mail. His trained eye, accustomed to spotting the out-of-place detail on a chaotic battlefield, zeroed in on one envelope. It was thicker than the others, made of heavy, cream-colored paper. Official. It was from the County General Hospital. It was addressed to him. Lieutenant Commander Elias Thorne. His fingers trembled as he tore it open, a brutal, ragged rip. He pulled out the folded papers. The word swam before his eyes, a meaningless jumble of codes and terminology, until a single line snapped into focus. Patient, Thorne, Sarah. Service, long-term care, ICU Wing C. The date stretched back 3 months. April. May. June. A bill for services rendered while he was on the other side of the world, believing she was watering her garden. He stumbled back, his legs losing their strength, and collapsed into a dining chair. The paper crumpled in his white-knuckled fist. The world had tilted on its axis, throwing him into a free fall. The surprise he had planned, the warm embrace he had craved, the life he had fought to come home to, it was all a fantasy. A ghost. The silence of the house was no longer empty, it was filled with the deafening roar of his wife's absence. He called the number on the letterhead, his voice a hoarse whisper when a calm, professional voice answered. County General Hospital, how may I direct your call? My wife, he choked out, the words tasting like ash. My wife, Sarah Thorne. I think she's a patient there. There was a pause, the soft clicking of a keyboard. Yes, sir. Mrs. Thorne is in our long-term care unit. Are you family? I'm her husband. The words felt like a lie. A husband should have known. The nurse's tone softened with practiced sympathy. Sir, your wife was in an accident in April. A serious one. She's stable, but she has not regained consciousness. She's in a coma. The floor dissolved beneath him. The house, his home, became a cage. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair. It was a smell he knew, but it had never felt so personal, so suffocating. He found her in room 304. Sarah. She was a pale, still version of the woman he remembered, a watercolor painting left out in the rain. Her vibrant energy was gone, replaced by the metronomic sigh of a ventilator and the steady, indifferent beep of the heart monitor. Wires and tubes tethered her to a life she wasn't living, anchoring her to a shore she couldn't reach. He stood there for a long time, the sea bag still slung over his shoulder, a useless relic from a life that had ended the moment he read that letter. He finally lowered it to the floor and pulled a chair to her bedside, taking her hand. It was limp, cool to the touch. He squeezed it, hoping for a response, a flicker, anything. There was nothing. A nurse told him her brother, David, was listed as her primary contact. David had handled everything. Elias felt a brief, fleeting sense of gratitude, quickly replaced by a gnawing question. Why hadn't David called him? The Navy had procedures. They would have found him, no matter where his ship was. He needed to understand the other part of this nightmare. The money. Back at the house, before he'd left for the hospital, he had logged into their joint bank account. The balance had made him physically ill. Where there should have been tens of thousands of dollars, his combat pay, their careful savings, there was less than $300. The transaction history was a brutal ledger of their life's blood draining away. Large withdrawals, week after week, all initiated after Sarah's accident. He found David's number and called him. The voice that answered was strained, defensive. Elias? When did you get back? I'm at the hospital, David. I'm with Sarah. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. He was in tactical mode now. Gather intelligence. Assess the threat. The bank account is empty. There was a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. Yeah, man. I know. It's the bills. The hospital bills, they're astronomical. I've been paying them. Keeping them from coming after the house. I've been handling it all. The explanation was plausible. It was the excuse of a hero, a brother stepping up. But Elias's instincts, honed by years of discerning truth from deception in high-stakes interrogations, screamed that it was a lie. The words were right, but the tone was all wrong. It was hollow. I need to see the receipts, David. All of them. Of course, yeah. I've got them somewhere. It's a mess, you know? It's been a lot. David's voice was slick with false sincerity. Elias knew that sound. It was the sound of a man building a wall. He hung up and walked the sterile corridors until he found the hospital chapel. It was small, quiet, a pocket of peace in the institutional chaos. An older man in a clerical collar was arranging hymnals. He looked up as Elias entered, his eyes kind and perceptive. "Can I help you, son?" the man asked. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Elias Thorne. My wife, Sarah, she's in room 304". The man's face softened with recognition. "Ah, Sarah. I'm Father Michael. I visit with her every few days. A beautiful soul. I'm so sorry for what you've come home to." Elias felt a crack in his rigid composure. "Her brother told me he's been paying her bills. He said that's why our savings are gone." Father Michael's kind expression tightened almost imperceptibly. He hesitated, choosing his words with care. "Elias, may I call you Elias? The financial aspect of a long-term illness can be complex. I happen to know that after the first 30 days, Sarah's case was reviewed by our financial aid office. Given your active duty status and her condition, the hospital wrote off a significant portion of her debt. The ongoing costs are almost entirely covered by a hospital charity fund and your military insurance." Her brother was made aware of this. He signed the paperwork himself. The words landed like precision strikes. Each one a direct hit. David knew. He knew the bills were covered, yet he had systematically drained their account anyway. The lie was exposed, and the truth was uglier than Elias could have imagined. "Her brother," Elias said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Does he have problems, Father?" Father Michael sighed, a deep, sorrowful sound. "I only know what I hear. The nurses talk. David has been in and out of trouble for years. Gambling, mostly. He sees his sister's tragedy not as a loss, but as an opportunity." A white-hot rage, pure and absolute, surged through Elias. It was the clear, clean fury of the battlefield. An enemy had been identified. A threat had to be neutralized. He had spent his life protecting others from predators, only to return home and find one had been living in his own house, feasting on his family's future. He felt a profound, crushing guilt. He had been on watch for his country, while his own home front was being plundered by one of their own. The life he dreamed of was not just on hold, it had been actively, maliciously dismantled. The path forward seemed brutally simple. He had the proof. The hospital records Father Michael had alluded to, the bank statements on his phone. He could destroy David. He could call the police, report the fraud and theft. He could use his status, his connections, to ensure the full weight of the law came crashing down on him. The tactical, logical part of his brain, the officer in command, demanded it. Justice. Retribution. A clean, decisive strike. But as he stood there in the quiet chapel, the righteous anger began to cool, leaving a raw, aching grief in its wake. He thought of Sarah. David, for all his monstrous flaws, was her brother. Her only living blood relative besides a few distant cousins. If she woke up, when she woke up, he corrected himself fiercely, what would she want? Would she want to awaken to a world where her husband had imprisoned her brother, shattering what little was left of her family? The choice was a razor's edge. Vengeance or mercy? Justice or the possibility of a fractured peace? Did he fight to punish the past, or did he fight to protect a fragile, uncertain future? He spent the next several hours back in room 304. He held Sarah's hand, the plastic chair groaning under his weight. The rhythmic beeping of the machines became the new cadence of his life. He talked to her, his voice low, telling her everything. He told her about the ship, about the long nights at sea, about the empty house and the overgrown garden. He told her about David, about the money. He confessed his rage, his guilt, his confusion. "I don't know what to do," he whispered, his forehead resting against their joined hands. "My job is to fix things. To neutralize threats. But this is different. He's your brother, Sarah. What do I do?" He watched the steady, mechanical rise and fall of her chest. He was a man trained for action, for clear objectives and defined rules of engagement. This was a war with no manual. He realized then that vengeance was a luxury he couldn't afford. It wouldn't heal Sarah. It wouldn't restore their savings. It would only salt the earth of their already ruined family landscape. His mission had changed. It wasn't to punish an enemy. It was to protect his wife, even her memory of her family, from any more damage. He had to stand guard over what was left. He arranged to meet David at a cheap, greasy spoon diner halfway between the hospital and David's rundown apartment. It was neutral ground, sterile and impersonal. David slid into the booth opposite him, his eyes shifty, unable to meet Elias's steady gaze. He looked smaller, weaker, without the buffer of a phone line between them. Elias didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He spoke with the cold, precise calm of a commanding officer laying out an unalterable reality. He slid a folder across the table. In it were copies of the bank statements, each withdrawal highlighted. Beside them were copies of the hospital's financial aid documents, the ones David had signed, clearly stating the majority of the costs were covered. "There is no version of this story where you are the hero, David," Elias said, his voice a low monotone. "There is no version where you were helping. There is only the truth. You are a thief who used his sister's tragedy as a cover for his addiction." David's face crumpled. The bravado, the defensive walls, all of it crumbled into dust, revealing the pathetic, terrified man underneath. I was going to pay it back, Elias. I swear. I just got in deep." "Stop talking," Elias commanded, and David fell silent. "I am not going to the police. I am not going to have you arrested." A flicker of relief washed over David's face, but Elias extinguished it with his next words. "That is not for your sake. It is for hers. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to enroll in a Gamblers Anonymous program. Today. You are going to get a second job. You will provide me with proof of both. A portion of every single paycheck you earn will be garnished and deposited directly into a new trust fund I am setting up for Sarah's care. I will oversee it. This is not a negotiation. It is your new reality. You will spend the rest of your life making this right. Do you understand your orders?" Tears streamed down David's face. He nodded, unable to speak, utterly broken. He knew he was beaten. Faced with the cold, hard evidence and the icy resolve in Elias's eyes, he folded completely. The confrontation was over. The immediate threat was neutralized. Elias felt no victory, no satisfaction. Only the hollow, cavernous ache of all that had been lost. He had won the battle, but the war for his old life was already over. He had lost. 6 months passed. Life settled into a new, strange rhythm. Elias had taken a shore-based assignment at a recruitment center downtown. His days were structured, his purpose clear, but it was a pale imitation of the life he'd once commanded. His real mission began each day at 5 o'clock, when he drove to the hospital. The house was no longer a tomb. He had cleaned it from top to bottom, exorcising the ghosts of neglect. He had spent weekends tearing out the weeds in Sarah's garden, turning the soil, and planting new bulbs, tulips and daffodils for a spring he hoped she would see. He talked to her every single day. He read her the newspaper, chapters from her favorite novels, and described the slow, patient rebirth of her garden. He received weekly updates from a stern-faced lawyer about David. The money was trickling back into the trust, slowly, painfully. David was in the program. He was working. It was a sterile, transactional form of penance, and it was the best Elias could do. One evening, he sat by her bedside, holding her hand. It was a familiar ritual, the quiet hum of the machines a constant companion. He'd just finished reading a poem she loved, his voice growing thick with emotion in the silent room. He fell quiet, just watching her face, the peaceful, unchanging lines of it. A nurse bustled in for her routine check, her movements efficient and practiced. "She's had a good day, Commander," the nurse said softly, offering a small, kind smile before she left. Elias squeezed Sarah's hand gently. "Did you hear that, sweetheart? A good day." As he stared at her, lost in thought, he saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor in her eyelid. A tiny flutter. His breath caught in his chest. It could have been anything. A trick of the low light. A nerve firing at random. A symptom of his own desperate, relentless hope, manifesting as a mirage in the desert of his grief. But it was something. For the first time since he had stepped out of that taxi, the crushing weight on his soul felt a little lighter. It was not an ending. It was not even a beginning. It was a watch he would continue to stand, a vigil he would keep for as long as it took. His mission was not over. He was at his post. And he would not be relieved.